The Ideal of Human Unity, Chapter 1. The Turn Towards Unity, Its Necessity and Dangers. The surfaces of life are easy to understand. Their laws, characteristic movements, practical utilities are ready to our hand, and we can seize on them and turn them to account with a sufficient facility and rapidity. But they do not carry us very far. They suffice for an active, superficial life from day to day, but they do not solve the great problems of existence. On the other hand, the knowledge of life's profundities, its potent secrets, its great, hidden, all-determining laws, is exceedingly difficult to us. We have found no plummet that can fathom these depths. They seem to us a vague, indeterminate movement, a profound obscurity from which the mind recoils, willing to play with the fret and foam and facile radiances of the surface. Yet it is these depths and their unseen forces that we ought to know if we would understand existence. On the surface, we get only nature's secondary rules and practical bylaws, which help us to tide over the difficulties of the moment and to organize empirically, without understanding them, her continual transitions. Nothing is more obscure to humanity, or less seized by its understanding, whether in the power that moves it or the sense of the aim towards which it moves, than its own communal and collective life. Sociology does not help us, for it only gives us the general story of the past and the external conditions under which communities have survived. History teaches us nothing. It is a confused torrent of events and personalities, or a kaleidoscope of changing institutions. We do not seize the real sense of all this change and this continual streaming forward of human life in the channels of time. What we do seize are current or recurrent phenomena, facile generalizations, partial ideas. We talk of democracy, aristocracy, and autocracy, collectivism and individualism, imperialism and nationalism, the state and the commune, capitalism and labor. We advance hasty generalizations and make absolute systems which are positively announced today, only to be abandoned perforce tomorrow. We espouse causes and ardent enthusiasms whose triumph turns to an early disillusionment, and then forsake them for others, perhaps for those that we have taken so much trouble to destroy. For a whole century, mankind thirsts and battles after liberty, and earns it with a bitter expense of toil, tears, and blood. The century that enjoys, without having fought for it, turns away as from a puerile illusion, and is ready to renounce the depreciated gain as the price of some new good. All this happens because our whole thought and action with regard to our collective life is shallow and empirical. It does not seek for it. It does not base itself on a firm, profound, and complete knowledge. The moral is not the vanity of human life, of its ardors and enthusiasms, and of the ideals it pursues, but the necessity of a wiser, larger, more patient search after its true law and aim. Today, the ideal of human unity is more or less vaguely making its way to the front of our consciousness. The emergence of an ideal in human thought is always the sign of an intention in nature, but not always of an intention to accomplish. Sometimes it indicates only an attempt which is predestined to temporary failure. For nature is slow and patient in her methods. She takes up ideas and half carries them out, then drops them by the wayside, to resume them in some future era with a better combination. She tempts humanity, her thinking instrument, and tests how far it is ready for the harmony she has imagined. She allows and incites man to attempt and fail, so that he may learn and succeed better another time. Still, the ideal, having once made its way to the front of thought, must certainly be attempted, and this ideal of human unity is likely to figure largely among the determining forces of the future, for the intellectual and material circumstances of the age have prepared and almost impose it, especially the scientific discoveries, which have made our earth so small that its vastest kingdoms seem now no more than the provinces of a single country. But this very commodity of the material circumstances may bring about the failure of the ideal, for when material circumstances favor a great change, but the heart and mind of the race are not really ready, especially the heart, failure may be predicted, unless indeed men are wise in time and accept the inner change along with the external readjustment. But at present the human intellect has been so much mechanized by physical science that it is likely to attempt the revolution it is beginning to envisage principally or solely through mechanical means, through social and political adjustments. Now, it is not by social and political devices, or at any rate, not by these chiefly or only, that the unity of the human race can be enduringly or fruitfully accomplished. It must be remembered that a greater social or political unity is not necessarily a boon in itself. It is only worth pursuing in so far as it provides a means and a framework for a better, richer, more happy and puissant individual and collective life. But hitherto the experience of mankind has not favored the view that huge aggregations, closely united and strictly organized, are favorable to a rich and puissant human life. It would seem rather that collective life is more at ease with itself, more genial, varied, fruitful, when it can concentrate itself in small spaces and simpler organisms. If we consider the past of humanity, so far as it is known to us, we find that the interesting periods of human life, the scenes in which it has been most richly lived, and has left behind it the most precious fruits, were precisely those ages and countries in which humanity was able to organize itself in little independent centers, acting intimately upon each other, but not fused into a single unity. Modern Europe owes 2/3 of its civilization to three such supreme moments of human history: the religious life of the congeries of tribes, which called itself Israel, and subsequently of the little nation of the Jews, the many-sided life of the small Greek city-states, the similar, though more restricted, artistic and intellectual life of medieval Italy. Nor was any age in Asia so rich in energy, so well worth living in, so productive of the best and most enduring fruits, as that heroic period of India, when she was divided into small kingdoms, many of them no larger than a modern district. Her most wonderful activities, her most vigorous and enduring work, that which, if we had to make a choice, we should keep at the sacrifice of all else, belonged to that period. The second best came afterwards in larger, but still comparatively small nations and kingdoms, like those of the Pallavas, Chalukyas, Pandyas, Cholas, and Cheras. In comparison, she received little from the greater empires that rose and fell within her borders, the Mughal, the Gupta, or the Maurya. Little indeed, except political and administrative organization, some fine art and literature, and a certain amount of lasting work in other kinds, not always of the best quality. Their impulse was rather towards elaborate organization than original, stimulating, and creative. Nevertheless, in this regime of the small city-state, or of regional cultures, there was always a defect which compelled a tendency towards large organizations. The defect was a characteristic of impermanence, often of disorder, especially of defenselessness against the onslaught of larger organizations, even of an insufficient capacity for widespread material well-being. Therefore, this earlier form of collective life tended to disappear and give place to the organization of nations, kingdoms, and empires. And here we notice first that it is the groupments of smaller nations which have had the most intense life, and not the huge states and colossal empires. Collective life diffusing itself in too vast spaces seems to lose intensity and productiveness. Europe has lived in England, France, the Netherlands, Spain, Italy, the small states of Germany. All her later civilization and progress evolved itself there. not in the huge mass of the Holy Roman or the Russian Empire. We see a similar phenomenon in the social and political field when we compare the intense life and activity of Europe in its many nations acting richly upon each other, rapidly progressing by quick, creative steps, and sometimes by bounds, with the great masses of Asia, her long periods of immobility, in which wars and revolutions seem to be small, temporary, and usually unproductive episodes. Her centuries of religious, philosophic, and artistic reveries, her tendency towards an increasing isolation, and a final stagnancy of the outward life. Secondly, we note that in this organization of nations and kingdoms, those which have had the most vigorous life have gained it by a sort of artificial concentration of the vitality into some head, center, or capital, London, Paris, Rome. By this device, nature, while acquiring the benefits of a larger organization and more perfect unity, preserves to some extent that equally precious power of fruitful concentration in a small space and into a closely packed activity, which she had possessed in her more primitive system of the city-state or petty kingdom. But this advantage was purchased by the condemnation of the rest of the organization, the district, the provincial town, the village, to a dull, petty, and somnolent life, in strange contrast with the vital intensity of the urbs, or metropolis. The Roman Empire is the historic example of an organization of unity which transcended the limits of the nation, and its advantages and disadvantages are there perfectly typified. The advantages are admirable organization, peace, widespread security, order, and material well-being. The disadvantage is that the individual, the city, the region sacrifice their independent life and become mechanical parts of a machine. Life loses its color, richness, variety, freedom, and victorious impulse towards creation. The organization is great and admirable, but the individual dwindles and is overpowered and overshadowed. And eventually, by the smallness and feebleness of the individual, the huge organism inevitably and slowly loses even its great conservative vitality and dies of an increasing stagnation. Even while outwardly whole and untouched, the structure has become rotten and begins to crack and dissolve at the first shock from outside. Such organizations, such periods, are immensely useful for conservation, even as the Roman Empire served to consolidate the gains of the rich centuries that preceded it, but they arrest life and growth. We see, then, what is likely to happen if there were a social, administrative, and political unification of mankind, such as some have begun to dream of nowadays. A tremendous organization would be needed under which both individual and regional life would be crushed, dwarfed, deprived of their necessary freedom, like a plant without rain and wind and sunlight. And this would mean for humanity, after perhaps one first outburst of satisfied and joyous activity, a long period of mere conservation, increasing stagnancy, and ultimately decay. Yet the unity of mankind is evidently a part of nature's eventual scheme, and must come about, only it must be under other conditions, and with safeguards, which will keep the race intact in the roots of its vitality, richly diverse in its oneness.